Well, the story I'm going to tell needs a little foundation. I was 15 the year this happened. I'm Native American and I live in the northern Nevada, in a rural area, so I grew up near animals and the outdoors, and I was a Boy Scout, so I knew how to identify most of the Nevada and Idaho wildlife. But this story I'm going to tell just ruined the outdoors for me. Every time I go camping or hunting, I will think of this every time. I smell garbage or a skunk. Well, when this happened, I was hunting with my brother, my two uncles, and my dad. We were going on a 3-night hunting trip. Where we were going had rivers, valleys, canyons, cliffs, and forests. Where we were camping was on the edge of the woods in a valley. It was our annual campsite. In the valley was a river that cut through the middle and ran into a natural lake that held trout, bass, and whitefish. When we had nothing to do, we would spend our time swimming or fishing. The water was cool and clear and attracted a lot of wildlife. I once watched a mountain lion and our cub drink the water. I heard all these stories about mountain lion attacks, but they are timid and shy. It was the second evening when we were sitting at the camp by the fire, joking and laughing when we were punched in the face with a putrid odor. It smelled like a garbage dump on a warm day. I was sprayed by a skunk. Then my uncle said, in a scared tone, "Let's go into the camper." I just did what he said and laid down and went to sleep. It must have been around 1:30 in the morning when I awoke to hear our trailer rocking and the same odor that we smelled earlier. I was confused at the rocking. At first I thought it was a cow that was pushing its head against the side of the trailer, then thought of the look on my uncle's face and it sent chills on my spine. I tried to go back to sleep when I heard footsteps on the roof of the camper. I needed to use the bathroom, so I grabbed my .22-250 and slowly opened the door and glanced around a little bit. Then it took off for the side of the camper. When I stopped and looked at the roof of it, there was a black figure that was crouched down and staring at me with red glowing eyes. I was scared to death, so I fired a round in the air to scare it off. It hopped from the position onto the ground and bolted for the tree line. When it got there, it looked back and let out the ugliest, most blood-curdling cry I'd ever heard. And I wished to never hear that cry again. I still go hunting in those woods, but have never went out at night or near that spot yet. Hello? I'm writing to your website because of some strange going-ons about the place I own here in Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona. We have the remnants of what used to be a working ranch from years ago. Some living livestock from those days, a few horses, a few Brahma, a couple of goats out there, and a longhorn I won in a bar fight in Mexia, down in Limestone County, Texas. And recently we think we have a Bigfoot around. We used to winter horses for people around these parts who are snowbirds, but no more because of the mystery disappearances that happen here. In fact, lots of mysterious things like that happen around the place, especially as fall nears and the weather cools, like September, October, and November. Nothing happens in summer out here. One notable incident was the disappearance of one of my best dogs, part pit bull / shepherd Mick. He wasn't afraid of anything and was great watchdog for the lower pasture. He guarded the grazing stock and 2 sheep we used to have and the goat from the local mountain lions and bobcats. Now, you may say the dog wandered off, but he was 10 years old and never left sight of the main house. He was a devoted dog. Some have said a bear came in the forest at night and took him, but my middle son found him exactly 14 feet up in the crotch of a pinyon pine tree with his neck snapped. No teeth marks were found, no bear claw marks, no mountain lion tears, just a broken neck and tossed up into that tree. Or if not tossed, someone must have put the dog's body up in that pinyon, which my son had trouble reaching. We all tried to explain that one. Now on to the sheep. I bartered with a half-breed for a ram and an ewe. It had them down in the grazing pasture along with the stock, horses, goats, and such. We only had them for a short while and they disappeared. For a while, we thought the previous owner snuck back here loading up the two, carried them off. But my wife ran into the fellow in the hardware store in town and talked to him about the disappearance. He came home that day with my wife together and we went looking for a sign. We found nothing that day, and I don't believe he had anything to do with the sheep disappearance. He told me a far-out story that got me thinking though, which is why I looked up Bigfoot on the internet. Anyway, he told me of a place up in the Sierra Prieta Bandoresa forest, where this Yavapai Indian woman ran her small flock of sheep into the company of a young cousin, a blue Merle Collie and a border collie that kept her flock together at night, fending off attacks by mountain lions and bobcats, sometimes wolverines. This one season, the woman and her cousin were bringing down the flock down the mountains from grazing. It was late October. Snows were expected. She said she was not feeling well and laid down in a grassy meadow to rest, but woke up when she heard the sheep bleating, her cousin yelling, and the dogs loudly onto something. The woman, sheep herder, said, escaping with a big ewe under his arm, the hairy man tried to fend off the biting dogs, kicked the one Collie dog. All to hell. This might be what befell my dog. She called off the dogs and watched the hairy man disappear into the pines with his prize. He explained the hairy man to her was what we call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. She only told the story once to an elder and she won't speak of it anymore, but he mentioned they come down from the north in winter. Hearing the sheep hoarder's story, putting two and two together, my sons, the half-breed, and I pretty much decided that we must have a rogue Bigfoot living somewhere near the property. I don't mind that so much. We don't mind sharing some fruit off our trees with him, but stealing a man's stock is another thing. I don't expect to put up with that. After reading up on your website, my boys and I, along with other dogs, packed a rifle and a scabbard and rode out recently in the morning during Thanksgiving week and covered the whole western stretch of the property line looking for a sign. You would laugh. We looked like a posse in a B-Western. We worked the edge of the tree line for about 2 hours looking for a trail. We found one that led deep into the forest, a section none of us have ridden before. We worked the horses through there in around thick brush. Soon we came to a stream and stopped to gather our bearings and water the horses. Dismounting, I thought I heard someone cough. I asked and nobody heard it but me. My horse jerked up, snorted, and became uneasy, sensing something none of us could see. The other mounts followed. All of us were focusing on keeping the horses under control as they danced about, bucking, kicking, and snorting. My sons thought mountain lion. I wasn't sure. We stood together there by the stream listening, calming the horses when the dogs started looking towards the thicket of tangled brush. Then the barking started in earnest, and they took off. Still, we couldn't see anything, but by now we all expected the dogs to tree a mountain lion. We couldn't follow. The brush was too thick, but the dog noise seemed to be about 20 yards into this thick brush and brambles. We kept calling and calling. Finally, the dogs returned and then took off again. Pretty soon the dogs returned with tongues hanging out, breathing heavy. We leashed the dogs up and took them and led the horses down to the stream. The dogs settled down, but the horses didn't. And as we were making an effort to saddle up again, that is when it happened. There came this howl that lengthened into a scream that at first sounded like a Brahma fart, low and guttural, and drug out and ending up into a high-pitched drone like a woman screaming of bloody murder. My body reacted with a chill, a goosebumps, mainly because the scream was coming from very close, somewheres in that thicket of brambles where the dogs had been. The scream was long and kind of dragged out. The kind of noise that gets your attention real fast. The half-breed yelled, "Zoyuko," which means Bigfoot, as he pulled the rifle out of the scabbard. By now, the horses were almost impossible to control. Then it got quiet. Not a sound, no birds, no crickets, no nothing. Everything was still, except for the horses. The dogs were now cowering between my legs and their ears pricked towards the thicket. Then, in the distance, we heard another scream. It must have come from across the next valley. Now, we are figuring there is fixing to be 2 of these Bigfoot, and I felt fear for the first time. The dogs started whining. My grown boys hurriedly saddled up. We followed and took off down the trail, heading at a full gallop, all the way home, a good hour later. Ain't never heard nothing like that vocalization before, and I've heard plenty coyote, plenty wolves and elks bugle, but never nothing like that before, and it wasn't no mountain lion scream. It was 4 times as powerful. If that was warning from a Bigfoot, we got the message. Having lived in the area for more than 4 years, I had become accustomed to and familiar with driving my ATV, a Honda 450 Foreman, in and around the Daniel Boone National Forest. I was 22 years old of age, and I was dating a local girl who lived in that county her entire life. We will call her Pam. We left my house one October night, traveled to the end of my ridge road, which is gravel, then continued on the dirt logging road, no longer in use at the time, which is privately owned. This road, of course, was wide enough to have, at one time, accommodated trucks and machinery used for logging. This old road goes for maybe a mile to a mile and a half eastward before splitting into 3 separate roads, each having several arteries branching from them. We stayed on the eastward path that runs into the Daniel Boone National Forest. From this point, there is an old house trail that the locals use for their equine excursions. We had traveled the entire horse trail and all the logging roads many times. I felt intimately familiar with every nook and cranny of these paths offered. Pam and I motored down the horse trail at a leisurely pace due to the narrowness of the trail among the thick forest trees. This, coupled with many twists and turns of the horse trail, one could rarely exceed 8 to 10 miles per hour. I know this was because the ATV had a digital MP3 readout that was a backlit for night travel. After 200 to 300 yards, we came upon a small pond that sits on the south side of the trail. This was a favorite spot of mine. Many times I would travel to the spot at night, turn off my lights and engine, and just sit there and gaze at the stars and take in all the smells and the sound effects the forest offers. I saw my first shooting star while gazing up in the fall sky the year before in this very spot. This small, circular pond sits in a very tiny clearing in the forest just off the horse trail, with the tree line only about 20 feet from the water's edge all the way around. I pulled around the side of the pond opposite the trail. Under a clear and half-moonlit sky, I turned off the engine and lights. I was oblivious that we had just parked near an entity that did not want us there. Fortunately, before we could even lift our butts off the seat to get off the ATV, there was a tremendous roar that came out from the tree line directly behind us, probably no more than 40 to 50 yards away. I was instantly terrified, as this was a sound I had never heard. It was loud and near. Pam screamed as I started up the ATV and headed back down the trail toward home. Luckily, the trail back out of there lay right in front of us. Holding on to me from behind, Pam remained silent as we made our escape. As quickly as I could, and without hitting any trees, we made our way back to the logging road, a few hundred yards away. I never remembered turning my body to look back, but I looked from side to side many times. This model ATV has 3 headlights. 2 are in a fixed position on the four-wheeler's front, and the third is attached to the handlebars, and thus turned from side to side several dozen times as we made our way back to the logging road. From the pond to the logging road, I saw nothing unusual on either side of the tree line. Neither directly nor in my peripheral. But remember, the horse trail is on forest property and the tree is much more densely populated. Even with the ATV's lights, in half moon my vision would have been severely limited. Neither of us shouted, spoke to one another during the retreat of the horse trail. During this time, I remember telling myself over and over that it must be some kind of animal or even bird that had made that awful noise. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we reached the logging road. It greeted us with a straighter, wider path and sparsely populated trees. Now comes to the recollection that haunts my dreams to this day. Having reached the logging road without seeing or hearing any signs that we were being pursued, and not wanting to wreck a course, I only moderately quickened our pace. Now, on the south side of the trail, something caught my eyes. I saw a dark figure running parallel to the road directly to my left about 30 yards. This thing was running on 2 legs. It looked like a very tall and very large human form. I looked directly at it for a few seconds, turned back to look at the road, and then turned to look at its direction once more to discover it was still there, keeping pace with us. During the second and final glance at this being, which also just lasted a couple seconds, it was one of those moments in my life where you wonder if what you are experiencing is real or just a dream. I looked down at my large digital backlit speedometer, 22 miles per hour. Finally, a moderately sharp bend in the south of the trail. I had to slow a little. As the road straightened again, I floored it, and for the first time, I turned my body to look to the left and a little behind to see if the curve to the left had allowed the creature an advantage, in case it was upon me or even in front of me. Nothing. It was not in close proximity to my left or rear. I even scanned the trees to my right. Nothing. I cocked my head to the side and yelled over to the sound of the engine, "Pam, did you see it?" These being the first words I had spoken since the encounter. She must have thought my abrupt acceleration was due to the fact that beyond the sharp turn in the trail we'd just passed, the road did become more straight and smooth. Her response in my ear was, "I didn't see anything. Did you see something?" I said no, with intention of telling her everything once we reached my house. I slowed my pace, and within minutes, we were on the gravel road which led home. We went over the experience again and again that night, but I never told her what I saw. I sold my four-wheeler and moved into the city the next summer of '99. I purchased another ATV in 2000. I bought a trailer and pulled my ATV to the 49 exit off I-75 and do my riding in Laurel and Rockcastle counties. I hauled my ATV back to the area I saw the creature on a summer day of 2001. I was alone. I went to the pond and stood on the bank for a few minutes. I skipped a few rocks and then left. It was a beautiful day. As a naturalist with a particular interest in mammals, I have been investigating reports of unexplained predators and stock killing in southern and western Victoria, Australia, for some time. I am not associated with any research group with a focus on cryptic animals, but with other independent researchers as appropriate. In the last few years, I have been given 2 reports of what appear to be hair-covered man-like animals in my research area. Intellectually, I have great problems with the idea of such animals occurring in Australia. But as I trust and respect the informants regarding these 2 reports, I thought it was best to make you aware of them. The first report I was to lodge came from a work colleague of mine and took place in the early 1990s. Michael and his wife, both educated health professionals, and 5-year-old son observed a meter high, approximately 3.3 foot tall, hairy hominid at close range from several seconds near. For several seconds near their house in the bush a few kilometers near, in the bush a few kilometers north of Ballarat. The sighting was made late in the day, but in good light and initially at the range of only several meters. The beast ran away from them at a great speed, a speed they felt no human could move at. While it was quite short when compared to an adult human, it seemed quite heavily built, and its forelimbs appeared to be disproportionately long. The hair was all over its body and about 5 centimeters long, approximately 2 inches. The same length on the head and dark brown in color. The face was not seen and the ears were not noted. It ran from where they had disturbed it near the entrance to their drive, diagonally across the dirt road that services the district, into a pine plantation and crashed through the undergrowth. The ground was too hard for tracks. It made no sound nor left any odor. Interestingly enough, at the time their son said he had seen it before. Now, however, he has absolutely no memory of that event and his parents don't like to refer to it. The other event related to me took place in the Otway Ranges west of Geelong near Tomahawk Creek. The observer, who wishes to remain anonymous, told me that in about 1989, he and 3 other mates, all in their late teens, were heading off for a night on the town in Colac in a battered sedan. It was already after dark, so they were making good pace along the gravel road through the state forest so as not to waste too much beer drinking time. Descending a steep hill, it was necessary to brake and gear down before ascending the coming hill. As they got to the bottom of the gully, an enormous man-shaped animal started to cross in front of them, but stopped and retreated. My informant, who was a passenger in the left front seat, and the 2 lads in the back seat all saw the animal and were in shock for a few seconds, but not the driver. The passengers all panicked and begged the driver to get moving. The driver thought at first they were joshing, but soon got the message. None of these boys wanted to talk about it, and I could get my informant to discuss it only once. They had never heard any talk about such animals in their district before or since. Animal was described as much taller than a man, maybe 2.2 meters tall, approximately 7 feet tall, and very broad with arms proportionally much longer than a human's arms, but legs compared to torso roughly the same as human. It had no real neck and its head was not exceptionally large. Face was not seen, but hair covered the whole body and was very long. The hair on the arms was described as hanging and very evident. In the headlights, he could not truly discern a color, but it may have been gray. My informant said it retreated very quickly. He felt it had tried to beat the car, but misjudged their speed. He has avoided that saw ever since. My sister, Natalie, and I decided to take the 4-wheeler out after dark against my father's words. We followed the trail from our property into the McMillan Marsh. There, we were able to run along a dike system between water reservoirs. It was midwinter, and my sister Nats was driving the 4-wheeler, and I was riding shotgun behind her along the dike. It was lightly snowing. Dark grew in fast, and we were suddenly surrounded by darkness and snow with 2 headlights to show the way. Suddenly, a large 7 to 8 foot creature walked up onto the dike in front of us, about 50 yards away. It stopped, turned, and looked right at us. We both noticed how the wind blew the long light brown hair, about a foot long, on its side apart, and it was white underneath, as the hair parted from the wind. Our four-wheeler nights were not high enough to see the face, but it had a large, muscular chest and arms and walked like a man. The chest was a little more hairless, so that you could see rippling muscles under the dark hair. It had very long arms and did not walk like a human. It sauntered along, totally unafraid of us. It swaggered with very long arms swinging at its sides, and then went off the dike and into the wilderness. We were shocked and horrified. We sat in shock and then thought over where its location was. There were very large footprints in the snow. We hurried home and never told a soul until years later. We compared what we saw, and our stories were exact. We will never forget that night. It was not a wolf, a bear, or anything human. I stand by that with my soul. If it were just me, I would have blown it off as a figment, but Natalie has every detail to the exact of my own. This is a report from the wife of a guy I work with. This is my first report since being a Bigfoot researcher. Here's the story as it was told to me. Around 15 years ago, me and my friend were horseback riding alongside the FEC Railroad tracks between SR 207 and Kings Estate Road. We were heading south towards King Estate Road when we noticed a smell like something was dead. I thought maybe it was a hog or something that died in the woods. You heard branches breaking like something was in the woods, but didn't pay much attention to it. Then the horses started to act up. Horses were blowing and snorting and rearing, and I just thought that they were being bad and difficult. As we passed that area, the horses acted better, and we went on down the side of the tracks till heading south. When I heard the sound of the rocks on the side of the tracks sound like someone was walking up on them. I told the friend I was with, "Don't walk the horses on the rocks." And he said I'm not. Just then, I turned to look around. She was just behind me to see what it was. That's when we saw it. It was about 150 yards away from us where we just passed, but standing in the middle of the railroad tracks. It was in some sort of crouched position and not all the way down. Like it just saw us and froze and stared at us. What I saw was slim and covered in reddish-brown hair, had long arms, and I could see the eyes a little. Was at least 6.5 feet tall and around 250 pounds, or better, with no neck. It was getting dark out, so we couldn't see any detail on the face. All the time that we saw it, we had to fight the horses to keep them under control. They didn't want any part of whatever it was, and neither did we. So we got out of there, and I never went back riding there again. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man, unless he was covered in hair from head to toe.